Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds, and then I will introduce our speaker for today. Welcome. Okay, it's officially 12 o'clock on my phone, so I'm going to get started. I want to introduce you all to Dr. Cindi Logsdon, who I'm really thrilled to have joining us today for this workshop. She is the Director of Research Academic Programs in the Office of the Executive Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Louisville, where she's also a professor in the School of Nursing. In addition to her many accolades, awards, and accomplishments, Dr. Logsdon has garnered significant external funding to support her research, including from the NIH. And for the past 2 years, she's been leading a task force on this upcoming NIH data management policy requirement. I can't really think of anyone better to lead us in our discussion today about this policy. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cindi to get us started.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm just delighted to be here with you guys. Until I met Christine, I didn't know that much about your university. And it, I think once in my life, I went to University of Maryland football game at College Park or whatever, where the University of Maryland, but that's my only relation to the university, other than having a lot of respect for many investigators that come from that system. So I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity. So in January of 2020, we got a new executive vice president for research, Kevin Gardner, who came from University of New Hampshire. And right away, he said that he thought we were behind in getting ready for this new imperative policy that was coming out from NIH. And part of his perspective came from the fact that he had been working on a task force with the Public Land Grant University Association to develop a guiding document. So he charged me to co-lead a task force, and I picked a very prominent researcher within the university from the Cancer Center to be my co-lead. We had all sorts of people throughout the university that were on that task force. We had people from compliance, we had faculty members and researchers, of course, we had people from the library, we had a member from IT, and so
Did you just lose sound? I turned it off because everybody else had theirs on.
Sorry, Deb. It looks like Deb is unmuted, and it looks like Cindi accidentally got muted. There we go. Try it again, Cindi.
Okay, so
just what you were just saying. Thanks.
Not sure where you stopped hearing me, but anyway, this new vice president for research had a national leadership role, charged me to form a task force. I brought a prominent researcher from the Cancer Center in. We had people from IT security overall in the university, and lots of faculty members and researchers. So it took 2 years because we weren't quite sure what our outcomes should be, and we just kept trying to update ourselves. So I shared with you as just extra documents what our outcomes were. And that is, we developed a policy, a university policy, saying we understood that this was our responsibility as a university to make sure the NIH policy was enforced. And then we negotiated with Duke to allow us to use an existing document they had that we thought were very good on procedures that investigators would need to follow. So I shared both of those documents with you, and they all seriously took 2 years. I don't know what it's like at University of Maryland of getting a policy approved, but it's quite, it's a 12-step process. I mean, it's seriously 12 steps of different approvals that you go through and establish procedures before you can get an actual policy. But we wanted the force of an actual policy, not just a recommendation. So anyway, I shared that with you. I don't know if an actual policy, pursuing a policy is helpful to you. I think it's going to be very helpful to us. So anyway, that's a little bit of my background and why Christine asked me to come. And so when she asked me, I wanted to learn a little bit more about your university. And this is just so exciting that you guys are in R1 and that your social sciences has such a high rank for federal funding. And so anyway, you guys are already doing great things and have such potential to do even more great things. It's really exciting for me to get to meet more of you and to talk to you today. So data management and sharing. Next slide, please. This just tells you the title of what I'm talking about and my particular credentials. So next slide. So what is scientific data? It's amazing that there's not a widespread understanding of what data actually means. So it's any data needed to validate and replicate research findings. It's accepted in the scientific community in that regard. And it does not include notebooks or preliminary analyses or forms or drafts or all of these things that I mentioned here on the slide. And there's really not a wide understanding of exactly when you say you have to share your data, like what it is that has to be shared. So sometimes that's reassuring to people to see that list of things does not need to be reshared. Okay, next slide, please. So why are we talking about this now? It's not just the NIH. Internationally, there's really been a widespread discussion for a couple of years and more that funded research needs to help those who are providing funds, like taxpayers and citizens. I'm the editor of a nursing journal that's an international journal with other people on the editorial staff with me from the United Kingdom, from Australia, from Hong Kong, and all of these people reflect the same sort of perspective that their countries are also saying that funded research needs to help those that are paying for it. And then in addition to that, science can best be advanced if the state of science is shared. So both of those things are reasons for why this NIH policy has come into effect. Next slide, please. So then the next question to ask ourselves is why now? And so we're talking about it now because NIH says after January 23rd, the whole world is different. Like what you have to have in a grant application in regards to data sharing and dissemination and so on is all different than it is before January the 23rd. Under this new policy, the investigator will plan for managing and sharing of scientific data, and that will be part of the application, submit an actual data management plan, and then comply with the approved plan. And part of our policy at the University of Louisville that's accepted is saying that we will enforce that investigators comply with that submitted plan. Next slide, please. So there's some key concepts, and you could have a lunch meeting on each of these and only talk about that one thing. So I'm just skating over the surface of all of these things. Data management plan, we talked about a little bit, and the NIH is very specific in what they want in that plan. And there are template plans that have been developed, and I'm going to flash up on one of the later slides what some of those components are. But the thing that you guys should attend to, in my opinion, is when investigators and teams are creating grant application, this is going to take a lot of time and attention. And there are components of that data management plan that whomever is developing the research approach or the strategy needs to pay attention that those things are in alignment. So the methods of data collection, everything that has to do with methods and research design needs to be reflected and consistent in that data management plan. And as I say, as you will see later, it's really pretty detailed and will take time and attention and the right skill set of individuals that are devoted to completing that data management plan. Data repository has gotten a lot of attention, and probably that's what investigators ask me first. In part of my 12-step process, I voluntarily made a presentation to the faculty senate at our university, just so because I thought it would be polite and they should know about this. And the data repository piece is what I got the most pushback on. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but NIH does have guidance on that, just so that you know, on one of their many informational sessions. Curation of data, what does that mean? It means what you have to do to get the data ready so that it can be shared. There's certain file types that are acceptable. It's just going to take someone with a particular skill set to do that. So curation of data is a new term that I've learned, and it's its own thing that we'll continue to talk about. Metadata is just the supporting data for the research study. Like sometimes people have something called variable files that gives a definition of each of their variables and how they're measured, that sort of thing. And then there is not any sort of requirement that identifiers remain in the data with human subjects data. Human subjects data will continue to be de-identified, and that's also a question that I've gotten. So next slide, please. Just going into data management plans. I flashed this up here from the NIH website, not so that you read it or we go over it, but the impression I want you to get is this is a detailed plan, and it asks some questions that investigators may not be used to answering, like what is their approach to data management, that's sort of like someone's philosophy of teaching sort of thing. So people need to, once again, have time to complete this. It needs to be upfront and consistent with their methods. It could be that their methods will be even stronger in the research approach because they've been forced to think through this with the data management plan. So just to let you know, this is a draft, and there are templates available from NIH to complete this too. Next slide, please. Same as this, I don't expect to go over all of this, but this is from NIH, and you can see that there are a lot of things, a lot of decisions to make when you pick your repository. There are companies that have repositories with a price associated with it, and some universities are going that route and having the actual repository company do the curation of data. Some universities are going the route of having full-time data management librarians who have expertise in this area that are doing some of the data curation and even have an in-university repository. Universities are reacting to these two things in very different ways. There are a variety of options that are available, whether doing everything within your university, whether using consultation from librarians and others, and then using free NIH or other nationally paid repositories, are going the proprietary route. So there's a whole list of these. There are a lot of questions to ask, and there's guidance available on the NIH website. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of choice of repositories, like how you would decide which one. Well, sometimes it depends on what sort of data you have and the size of your data. And sometimes the funding itself will dictate what repository that you have to use. So anyway, that's what this goes over. But if you look at that little circle at the very bottom, small data sets, and this could be not even an NIH funded study. This could be a very small grant, an internal grant, some other sorts of small data sets. One of the recommendations is that it could actually accompany the article. and be in the submission of the article submitted to PubMed Central. And so there are just lots of options. I'm saying that because this is a national trend. NIH is requiring this now, but this is a trend-setting sort of announcement and rule that will impact most of us, I believe. So just so that you know, in order to answer questions, in terms of repositories, once again, some funding mechanisms require a specific repository. There are many free repositories available that the federal government pays for. Some people may have data sets so small they may not even need a repository, and other people may decide to go with repositories and data curation with a company for a charge. So there are lots of options and choice of repositories, and it'll just depend on resources and the choices that universities make. So I talked about this slide 10 already a little bit. Curation is a whole process, and it's just a process. If we could go to the next slide, please. Sorry, Amy. Curation of data, once again, this is a new term for me, is the process that you use to prepare the data to share. So next slide. So this is a link to NIH that I'm giving you about a workshop that's going to be on November the 15th about data curation, in case anybody's interested. It's an interactive sort of process. The term that's used frequently that you should be familiar with, and one reason I wanted to put this slide up, is that data curation practices should follow this FAIR principles. That is, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So however data is prepared to be ready for to be shared, it should be prepared in such a way that these FAIR principles are followed. So anyway, this is a upcoming source of information and guidance from NIH. Next slide, please. Okay, so metadata, remember, these are the supporting data or the backup data or the backup information that allows another investigator to use the data. So it would be procedures, labels or variables, definitions, and any other information that would be supplementary to the data itself, but that someone would need before they would understand this particular data set that they open and do not know what to do with. So metadata are these things, but once again, it's only what's necessary in order to share that particular data, and it's not that whole list of other things that we saw in an earlier slide, like lab books and preliminary reports and that sort of thing. Okay, next slide, human subjects data. There is a form that I gave you a link to on the OSP website that gives an example of a human subjects data informed consent. So obviously, if our requirement now is to share certain aspects of human subjects data when it is funded by NIH after January the 23rd, then the informed consents that patients sign or any sort of research participants sign need to include that language, that they understand what it is that is going to be shared. So most informed consent statements that I'm used to has something in it about personal identifiers will not be shared, but compiled data may be shared. And so this is that same sort of thing, but just a clearer language around the requirement of why this has to be shared. So I just wanted to give you an example of that, because once again, that's frequently one of the questions that I've gotten as I've presented this, going through my 12 steps of presenting this to various people. Okay, next slide, please, talks about budget. So this is another big question that I've gotten, particularly from people with a variety of different sizes of budgets for grants. You know, for smaller grants, even with NIH smaller grants that are below R01 funding levels, the amount of money is not that much. And sometimes people are worried about being able to conduct the science and meet their aims and goals with the budget as it is. And now we're putting on these different requirements, and that is a concern. But at least the NIH is coming out with what, how budgeting can be done in allowable cost, which is what are on the next two slides. So applicants may request funds for data sharing in the budget and such things as preparing the data set, preparing the documentation, providing support to data users, archives, and so on. So those are some general categories that can be in the budget that are allowable at the end of a grant for investigators to use those funds to start to get the data ready for sharing. And then the next slide has allowable cost. So preparing the data, curating the data, doing all the stuff you have to do to prepare it, to put, to have the data in a certain type of file preparation, to have identifiers with that file, all the things that you have to do to get the data ready, the costs of all of that, and the particular type of personnel that might be needed to prepare that data may be different from someone who is needed earlier in the budget or the timeline of the grant. So being able to include that person at the end of the grant to get the data ready is allowable. Developing supporting documentation, formatting the data, de-identifying the data, preparing the metadata, any sort of local data management considerations, preserving the data, and so on. So all of those things are allowable towards the end of a grant, and the NIH guidance on this actually says, of course, you can always do a no-cost extension at the end of a grant, and these activities could occur during the no-cost extension, but you don't plan for a no-cost extension when you're describing the work of the grant. So in preparing a budget, these would be in the last however many months of the grant that are acceptable with the budget. Okay, next slide, please. So how do you guys position your organization for these NIH changes? I'd just like to hear from you, like what strategies would help your center and other places in the university to prepare grant applications that follow these new requirements.
Well, I would love to hear from any of our research administrators on the call, because I know there are several. I think, you know, Cindi, one of the things I'm really pleased about that you've been able to do is kind of give us that personal walking through of what's entailed. I think it's one thing for faculty to sort of hear it in something like a webinar format, which is super helpful, but then many months pass until they actually prepare the application. So I think we need to make sure to stay up to date on some of this information so that we're ready whenever faculty then come and say, I've got these specific questions, you know. So I guess part of my question is, you know, how do you think we can keep up our chops if we sort of learn how, you know, to guide folks at, you know, now, what is this going to look like a couple months down the road? Are things changing? How can we sort of, you know, stay on top of it? So that's sort of a long-winded response.
Yeah, well, I put in the next slide, just looking at your website.
My hand's not waving.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
We have Deb with her hand up.
Yeah. Hi there. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a new laptop, so I have my sidekick standing here to troubleshoot for me. So my question is, in the last part we were talking about for archiving and I can't remember all, compiling all the data and gathering it. Asking for a no cost extension is fine, but what if you're in the last part of a no cost extension and you still need more time? Because a lot of times your data, it's still coming in. So they may not have time before the grant actually ends in their period of performance to do all of that. So are there any plans for saying, okay, you can have, 60 days for this after the end of the period of performance ends?
Well, I don't know what NIH is going to say or what their plans are, but we're planning for the future now. The funded grants that go in after January the 23rd of 2023 are the ones that we have to be concerned about. And so it's really important when investigators are developing their timelines and their budgets, especially the budget for the last 25% of the timeline and so on, that these activities get included, that there is money for it, and that there is time for these activities to take place. And so ideally in a timeline of a grant, you would not still be collecting data in the last 6 months of the grant or the last however many months of the grant. So I know all kinds of things happen, but we're planning for the future, after January, that it's really important for guidance to be given to investigators. We understand sample sizes, but that there needs to be a realistic timeline and budget for what's going to happen in the last 25% time of the grant. And
I agree in a perfect world, but like you said, something seems to always happen that they get behind schedule, and I'm just like looking into the future, like you said, and thinking this is going to happen.
So we've got time now to give that guidance to people that are submitting grants the middle of January to say,
right.
Just know, you have to have this data management plan. Your methods need to match up with the data management plan. Everything in your approach needs to be consistent with what you're saying in this separate document, this data management plan. Your timeline needs to, in your approach, needs to be consistent with what you say in the data management plan, and you need to follow it. I mean, we are liable as universities to make sure people follow that. And no cost extensions are one thing, but even an agreement to a no cost extension to try to get a sample size up, that's understandable, but still part of that time period needs to include fulfilling the requirements of NIH related to this data management plan.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. That's just, as both a researcher and a research administrator, that would be the guidance that I would give. Just make sure people get that.
Okay,
that message.
I will try to get that message through.
So who can be your partners? You guys are researchers and research administrators and grants management. So who else in the university can be your partners to make sure this happens? Well, just in looking at your website, your library already has some information on there, and that can certainly be beefed up, as more and more information is developed about NIH and data sharing, and even open science sort of initiatives going on that are partners with these data management initiatives. So your library is your partner. I assume you have a department that is University Communications that can help you get the message out to everyone that this is coming and you need to get ready for it, and it's a really serious thing, and that your university is responsible for enforcing this. So I don't know if you want to go the route with procedures and policy that we did. We just wanted some teeth in what we said, that it wasn't just our office. So anyway, that that would be up to you. But I have learned the importance of benchmarks since I've been in this role of research administration. I used to, just as a researcher, just only go to the science, the published literature, but I very much evolved and learned the importance of not reinventing the wheel to look at benchmarks. And my most important benchmark for this particular initiative was Duke. Duke has a lot of money and a lot of resources and will never be able at the University of Louisville to do things exactly the same way that Duke is doing it, but they're very kind and generous in sharing their journey. And they actually allowed us to use their procedures document and to revise it for our own. So you'll see when you look at the document that I sent you guys that it says used with permission from Duke, that we revised it, but you know, the original document was theirs. So it's not only taking advantage of NIH education and websites, but what our benchmarks are doing and what they've already done, you know, people that have gotten started years ahead of us, what they've already done can just be so helpful to not feel like you're starting from scratch. So I'd say your partners are your library and your university communications department, whatever you decide to do individually about policies and procedures that would work for you, and then looking at who you consider your good benchmarks. And for me, it was Duke. So I wanted to kind of once again give you some opportunity just to talk to me and for us to talk to each other, not that I was just talking. So these are some similar questions that I've gotten, and I just thought you guys might want to talk about them a little bit. So this was from the Faculty Senate Executive Committee. I got this question. My research is funded from a small grant from a professional organization. How does the NIH policy apply to me? How would you guys answer that?
All right, Cindy, I'm going to go out on a limb and say if it's funded through somewhere else, then the NIH policy does not apply. Is that correct?
That's right. It does not apply, though everyone that I've ever talked to feels like this is just the start. NIH is being the leader here, but the way that we responded to this at the University of Louisville in our actual policy is to say that if this does not apply to individuals, that they need to follow the guidelines from their own discipline, whatever their own disciplinary standards would be. Even the National Science Foundation has not yet required people that they are funding to share in the same way, but they recommend. Their verbs just are not as strong. Instead of require, they're recommending so far. But you know, I just feel like everyone, this is a huge international momentum of data sharing and open scholarship. So right now,
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, some of us I know are familiar with the NSF's data management plan, and it's been around for longer. I was actually curious if you had a sense of where the places where it diverges, where the two maybe are the same and where this one is diverging. I'm sort of curious also why the NIH is doing this now, whereas NSF I think has had it in place for quite a while. So I don't know if this is sort of an effort that's going in a different way from NSF.
So I've been involved with NSF data management plans, but not in the last 2 years. So I don't know if anything about them has changed in the last 2 years. So the differences that I've seen so far, but every day it changes, is that the word recommend is used. And then I do not believe the plan is the requirements are quite as detailed as that slide that has all of those components. But you know, I've never seen anything change quite so quickly. And it's, as you know, as Christine was, it's just even hard to keep up. Like you don't know what they're going to be posting twice this week. So, you know, we'll all have to just keep on the little treadmill of trying to grab anything that comes up and to share it with each other so we make sure that no one misses it. So the second question I throw out is similar, and I got this once again from the Faculty Senate. My research is unfunded and my data set is small. Must I follow the NIH policy? This is similar, and so you may have noticed on that one slide I had about repositories that there are some options that you can actually share your data, prepare your data and share it with the manuscript submission at PubMed. And there are many journals that are actually starting to have this requirement. So how do I find a data repository? So anybody remember any of that from the one slide? Remember, there are some repositories that are funded by NIH that would be free if your particular area of specialty matches with that. So some are free and paid nationally. Sometimes people have their own repositories like Duke does within their universities. There's one called Figshare that I believe is pretty generic and free. And so NIH offers guidance on that, on how to find a repository on one of their many educational sessions. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, and then the last question I have is, what research team members are needed for data curation or getting the data? So from the time an investigator finishes data collection, they've finished the data collection part of their study, and the statistician is taking over and doing the data analysis. So after these steps happen, then what sort of skills, what type of team members then need to get the data ready for sharing? Anybody have any ideas?
I have a question. When you say like data ready for sharing, like do you mean start to finish, like cleaning and all that? Or do you mean just kind of like the data's clean, we're doing our analysis and we're preparing it, like to present?
So this is a whole new thing, a whole new stage of research that's beyond, I mean, cleaning up the data certainly would be part of it, and getting the ready for analysis would be part of it. But this is a step after that in which the data continues to be cleaned. There are particular types of files that are acceptable for the data to be saved in before they can be shared. A digital identifier is associated with the data, just like it would be with a publication. So this is a whole new thing, this data curation or getting the data ready to share. And there, you know, those are some of the steps with that. And then getting all of the files in order that would be the metadata, like the variable definitions and all of that. So on your current research team members, who could do that sort of work? Kara, I don't know if that's you, that if
I'm
you
just
want
a
to
grad
continue.
student. I'm really just a grad student.
Okay.
Research development. So
Just a grad student. Grad students are very important. She can hear. Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb here. How about an archivist?
Well, I don't know if an archivist is a librarian, like what discipline that person would come in from, or different. So there seems to be a new area of library science in which people have this expertise in digital data. So I think at different universities, there will be different people that do this sort of work, but somehow it would be a combination of people with data science skills. That may be librarians in some places, that may be some sort of statistician or someone with data analytics skills, or two of them on particular teams. I've just seen it done both ways, that sometimes it's a person with a library background that does this data preparation, and sometimes it's someone with a statistics background, or maybe it's both. But it's preparing the data in a particular file that can be shared, and then then putting a digital identifier with it, and then all of the metadata that some would need before they could interpret what the numbers mean that they're seeing. So that's what data curation means.
So Cindi, could this simply be the PI that is doing it, that's doing this piece?
If they had the skill set to do it. I'm not sure I would have the skill set to do it as PI, but yeah. But if you do have other team members, even if it's a PI doing this work, there needs to be time in the research timeline, and also the budget for this work to be done.
That's a good point. I don't think I thought about weaving it into the project timeline. Yeah.
Timeline and budget. You know, if it's a requirement, then we have to, it's not going to be a credible data management plan unless there's time and resources in the budget to accomplish this work of preparing the data for sharing. So I guess my conclusion of all of this would be is that we're all just still getting ready. I've been working on it for 2 years, and I still feel like we're still just getting ready. I think we will continue to have pushback at our university, not from people with current NIH funding, but with other people who say this is another unfunded mandate from the Vice President for Research Office. And until we say, if you don't have NIH funding, then you need to follow your disciplinary standards or what your particular funding source requires of you. So I think that conversation will need to be continued and important. You know, people do not always hear. I still struggle with the most appropriate way to share this sort of information when it's a mandate. We have something called University of Louisville Today. That's like an email that goes out to everyone. But this weekend, actually, I'm going to write up how the Vice President for Research shares this information to the whole university community. I find I need some time away from other responsibilities before I can really write such a thoughtful piece. And I tried last weekend, and I was too tired from traveling with Christine the weekend before, I guess. So I don't know. Anyway, so we are going to share this soon to put out in an official publication or communication from the Vice President for Research, and try to communicate in as many ways possible. We'll have it on our website. We'll share with the library website, the data management piece of the library website. So we'll have announcements at various research venues that we keep finding a variety of different ways to remind people of this mandate and how they need to start getting ready now.
I think that's the ticket, right? Because somebody might hear about this today and then 8 months later put in a proposal and realize that, oh, right, you know, I have to deal with this piece of it, and then have to go back and get all the information. So you're making me think about ways that we could make kind of maybe a place on our website where we could have at least a central repository of some places to go to get more information.
Because it's really going to take time. And some investigators just are so last minute with their grant applications, you know, and down to the wire before an hour when the button has to be pushed, like making changes and so on. That's not going to work. With this data management plan is so involved. I mean, it will take as much time to write that, I believe, as some big sections of the grant. So people just need to make sure they understand that before January the 23rd. This is going to take time, be thinking about it and determine what resources are available to you in terms of team members that can do this work that's now required. Any other questions from anybody? I'll just say once again, it's the oddest sources that give pushback on this kind of thing. So just kind of be ready for that.
Any questions from any of our folks, investigators, or the research admin community? Anybody have any questions? I find it a little overwhelming. So Cindi, I think you've done an amazing job hitting all the key pieces, and it's sort of like, you know, trying to process all of that and then processing it in the moment when we're actually working on a proposal is the other thing.
Well, I wonder if you would want to think about following up with one of your experts within the university doing a brown bag on data curation, because I don't know who you have there that could speak to that, whether you would want the library to speak to it or your statisticians or a data management expert of some type to say, this is how we're viewing this piece of what the requirement is, and these are some resources here. We've been
Great
meeting
idea.
with our librarians. I had two librarians that were on the task force with me, the 2-year task force. And then separately from that, my vice president for research and I met with the leadership in the library unit of the university and said to them, please give us some different options, like what you can do now with the resources that you have. Like if you had some more money, if the university gave you more money, what's the next level you could do and what's the top level you could do? And,
Yeah.
and they did that, and that was actually very helpful. But when you have a benchmark that you're working with, like Duke, and you can see everything that could be done to support faculty and enhance research and enhance adhering to the requirements. If you only had that much money, it's very awe-inspiring. But it's also helpful to see, what to work for. Anybody have any questions?
I'd like to add to that too, Christine. I think that's a great idea to have a follow-up brown bag from a departmental administrator's point of view. Just doing the budget, we need to know exactly, what we will need for this step and what the cost is. So if we could work that into the brown bag as well, that would be great.
I think if you guys just took off a little part of this at a time and talked about it, and I think this curation of data is what my people at least have the most trouble understanding. Like who can help,
Yeah.
and how to fill out this form and what this piece even means. And you don't need to call it curation of data. If you think that term is too offsetting, you can have another term for it. That's just the term that Duke uses and that NIH uses, but it doesn't, you don't have to use that term. You could say something like getting the data ready for sharing.
I think it will probably be helpful to be consistent though, because if the PI starts reading NIH's guidelines and then we're calling it something else, it might be kind of confusing. So yeah, I think I would just call it curation.
But I just think that's the big one. Other than pushback I've gotten philosophically that people think, once again, that this is a mandated but unfunded sort of thing that they're resisting. But to be able to understand the activities and the personnel and the budgets around data curation, I think would take you a long step towards getting ready for January. Any other
Anybody
questions?
else? Cindy, I think you've answered everything. Thank you so
Well,
much. This is super helpful.
You're sure welcome. And I think like an overview like this is only meant to like create more questions that you can actually do something about, you know, like having it. So now you think that maybe you could go back and do something on data curation, but also start to think about who you have there that are, you know, that are your strengths. Maybe you have the world's best something or the other, library or statistician or something that you can really build on that.
Yep, that's a really good point that I hadn't thought about. The library is a huge resource, so I'm going to be following up with them for sure. So everybody, yeah, no, sorry, go ahead, Cindy. I was going to remind them of your documents, but please go ahead.
I was just going to say they do have some stuff. I looked ahead of time. They do, you know, not as much as I would like to see, but they do have. They are introducing the topic.
Got it. Okay. Yep. And I know we participate in the ScholarWorks open access. So anyway, I do think that's a really great idea. So yeah, everybody, you know, Cindy has shared a bunch of supplemental documents with us that Amy has, and I believe she sent to those of you who are registered in advance, she sent you those documents. If you haven't gotten them, stay tuned. Amy will send those documents and also the link to the recording, and we'll be posting it on the our center's YouTube channel pretty soon as well in the next probably day or two. So you can always come back to this webinar if you need to consult Cindy's really helpful slides. And then you can also avail yourself then of all the other information that's out there, including on the NIH website. So if I don't hear any other final questions or see any other hands, thank you all so much for coming. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. This was great.
Good to see you. Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.